Thomas Paine. If history was your thing, then you know. If not, quick reminder. Thomas Paine wrote the 47-page pamphlet, Common Sense. Published January 10th, 1776, right at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. He published it anonymously in the beginning because he's writing as a British subject and it would cost him his life. It was an immediate sensation among the colonists. It spread like wildfire, literally, in proportion to the population of the colonies, about 2.5 million at the time of publication. It remains to this day the largest sale and circulation of any published book proportionally in American history. For those who could read, it was a topic of conversation. For those who could not, they would gather in local gathering places and listen to it be read so that it could be their topic of discussion. As late as 2006, it was still the all-time best-selling American title, and you can get it in print today. So why such rapid acceptance? A lot of times we see things that turn out to be works of art or literature that are accepted years later. Why this immediate reception? 47 pages, 4 sections of common sense, therefore the title, arguments, used to encourage common people, things that they could understand and reason, to encourage them in the colonies to fight for an egalitarian government, a government based not on aristocracy, but on equality. Common sense, a rare commodity in our world. We have become people who, as a whole, do not examine evidence and draw rational conclusions. We'll jump at anything and ignore the evidence. Yet common sense remains one of the more important tools in the bag of anyone attempting to prove or disprove an argument, a theory, a belief, whatever. The ability to lay out, look at evidence, draw rational conclusions. By the way, side note, common sense is attainable. It may not be your strength, but you can get there. Even those that we think of as not having enough sense to come in out of the rain can develop it. How do I know that? If you touch a hot stove once and get burnt, common sense tells you not to touch it again. You figured it out. Apply it to the other things in life. It works the same way. It's really just a matter of stopping to think, stopping to evaluate, stopping to draw the appropriate conclusion based on the evidence. So far in this new Mail Out series, trying to establish the authority of the Bible, the existence of God, we have observed, number one, that our faith is not blind. There is evidence for what we believe. And that evidence will get us to the point that we don't have to leap to believe in God. It is a very small step because it is the rational conclusion. Number two, we've looked at the fact that the science in the Bible is both accurate and prophetic. Every time science and the Bible intersect, the Bible proves itself to be accurate. And it does so at times millennia ahead of us. So number three, today? Common sense. Where does common sense take us, in this case this morning, if we look at the complex design of our world? If we look at Genesis 8 and we see cycles and revolutions, this is considered the most difficult piece of music to play in the history of our world. La Campanella. This is considered the most difficult math equation to solve in the history of our world. In fact, it is still considered the most significant open problem in all of math. Question. Does common sense allow you to believe that either was an accident, that the composition wrote itself? Does common sense allow you to believe that they are the work of a baboon? Or the result of a printing press exploding and things randomly falling onto a page? If common sense allows you to buy one of those theories, I have some oceanfront property for you in Arizona that I will sell you cheap. Look, we're not that stupid. We get it. The music, we know better, was written by Liszt's. It is considered so complicated that it takes the most skilled musicians in the history of our world to be able to play it. Bernard Riemann proposed the Riemann hypothesis, the math problem I showed you. By the way, if you can solve it, it's worth $1 million today. 1859. And we still can neither prove nor disprove it. So a piece of music only the most skilled musicians in the world can play, and a 165-year-old math theory that remains unproven, we recognize as requiring intelligence, and yet evolutionists and atheists want us to believe that life happened by accident? Where's the common sense? Where is the part where that leap makes any rational sense at all? They want me to believe that after something that they cannot give me an origin for, this super dense, minuscule dot of matter, after it went bang, they want me to believe that life popped out of the chaos. And that makes sense. Look, I like numbers. Okay, I like odd numbers. Angie and I talked about this one day. I don't do even numbers. You end up with nothing in the middle. I have to have odd numbers. And I really have to have prime odd numbers. Okay, yes, I'm weird. But when the article, when Greta started quoting Bert Thompson and Carl Sagan's numbers, look, I love numbers. I was working on a minor in math. My mind was boggled. Sagan, an agnostic now, someone who simply put, would argue that the existence of God is unknowable. So not even arguing from our perspective. Said that the chance of life evolving on any given planet is 1 chance in 10 to the 2 billion. Wow. Dude, seriously, how can you argue that makes sense? The 1 followed by 2 billion zeros of a chance that these things bumped into each other, and you can't even tell me where they came from, and they created life, and you expect me to buy what you're selling. Dude, give me some credit. We obviously live in a world where the smarter you get, the less common sense you have. Where at some point, the evidence no longer matters to you, if you can buy that. I remember 2 gospel meetings from my youth. At my age today, I can still remember these men filling the pulpit at the North Jefferson Church of Christ in Mount Pleasant, Texas, in the late 70s and early 80s. One of them actually took place when I was still in my single digits. It was a meeting held by John Clayton. Look, do not go read his modern material and follow him. He's one of those who got too smart for his own good. But he did a meeting then, right after he had come out of atheism. And he did it all over the United States, entitled, Does God Exist? And one of those lessons in that series was why I left atheism. And as I started thinking about this, I remembered arguments from a gospel meeting in my single digits 50 years ago. I still have the booklet from that night. I may reference other parts of it through this series, but I want to limit it to 3 very quickly this morning. John Clayton was a second-generation belligerent atheist. He was not one who was content to sit in the shadows. He was on a mission to disprove the Bible and discredit Christianity. He holds multiple degrees, including a master's degree in geology and earth science. These are pursuits he began in high school. By the way, those advanced degrees are what got him in trouble because he chose to go to Notre Dame to get them, and he drank the Kool-Aid. But he said there are 3 things that really got him as an atheist. He said, number 1, he thought Christians were ignorant. He thought we were foolish. He thought we were refusing to look at the evidence. And yet on the night that he finally obeyed the gospel, he realized that he was the fool. That he had been doing the same thing he was accusing us of doing. He actually referred to himself as a stupid, ignorant fool. Psalm 14 and verse 1, Psalm 53 and verse 1. The fool as is said in his heart, there is no God. And he said, I realized it because I spent my whole life doing exactly what I was accusing others of doing. And I quote, I had rejected God. I had been dishonest. I had been actually stupid in my response to the evidence available to me. Remember, he was a scientist studying science. I didn't like people who refused to look at the evidence and draw intelligent conclusions. I'd always accused the religionists of doing this, and yet I recognized that I had done it. I had refused to be honest. I had refused to look at the evidence. I had refused to make comparative choices based on what was available to me. A scientist, an atheist, it takes a fool to ignore evidence. to look around and see the complexity of life, to look around and realize that science can't tell me how it started, and then to buy it. To refuse to acknowledge the conclusion that the evidence demands is ridiculous. And this atheist realized it. Number two, one of the things that he said forced him to acknowledge the foolishness of his position was an attempt to disprove the Bible. He read the Bible as an atheist from cover to cover 4 times his sophomore year in college. That's dedication, because I've been a sophomore in college. How you find time to do that? And he did it with the intention, so many atheists do this, to find contradictions. Specifically, in his case, he wanted to throw them in his girlfriend's face, who was a Christian. He had been dating her for several years. She had been trying. He wasn't buying it. So he is looking for a way to discredit her. So 4 times in a year he reads the Bible. And the conclusions? This is an atheist, remember. Number 1, there are no scientific contradictions in the Bible. The science in the Bible is 100% accurate every time. Number 2, because that is the case, he went on to conclude you cannot disprove the Bible's claims. Because it's historically accurate, because it's scientifically accurate, when it claims to be the authoritative Word of God, he said you cannot disprove that. He says the straw that finally broke the camel's back, in reference to that right there, came at the point that he turned in his final for his first geology class. His geology class was taught by a professor that he considered to be a brilliant, well-known atheist. This professor stood up on the first day of class in the midst of a discussion and said, "I am going to show you that the Bible is a bunch of garbage." John said, "I got excited. I was still claiming to be an atheist, but I knew I was on shaky ground. He's going to give me the evidence I need to throw at my girlfriend." As the class progressed, he heard the professor make several unsubstantiated statements. And John really wanted to find the truth, so he challenged those statements. And every time the professor finally had to retract his statement. So John said, "I went to turn in my final. And as I reached to hand it to the professor, I said, 'Sir, you haven't really shown me any contradictions between what we have studied in this course and in what the Bible has to teach.'" And this, quote, brilliant, well-known atheist, to John's horror, said, "Well, I guess if you really study it, there's no contradiction." John said, "I was shocked. That's not the answer he wanted." He said, "I was appalled. This man had a PhD. He's a learned man. He's an outstanding atheist, and he can't even answer the silly questions of an ignorant college junior who's on his side." He said that was it. He got back to his dorm room at 11 a.m. that morning after that final, and he sat down on the edge of his bed. And for 7.5 hours, he sat there and wrestled with his soul. At 6:30, he got up and he went to the local church. He had been going there occasionally, hoping that he could have some questions answered. He'd been going hoping he might even convince the preacher that his belief was unrealistic. But after reading the Bible cover to cover for 4 years and finding no contradictions, after realizing that his professors at the height of atheism could not find a contradiction in the Bible, he stepped out into the aisle And he said the preacher went into a mild state of shock. And then he said, I went home and I called my girl. And I said, Phyllis, I've become a Christian. And she replied, I don't believe you. Quit lying to me. Because you see, he was one of those atheists that lived the life of an atheist. He had no moral compass. He said, I had tried everything there was to try in life, the sex and the drugs, and anything I could get my hands on. And at one point, he said, at 22, I'd gotten to the point that my life was so bad, I was sitting on the edge of my bed with the .22 rifle pointed at my chin, trying to develop the courage to pull the trigger. And so it shocked the preacher. And it shocked his girlfriend. In fact, the preacher's wife had to call his girlfriend and convince him, yes, I saw him obey the gospel. No contradictions. The Bible is accurate without fail. It can withstand any test, including a test administered by a PhD atheist, making it exactly what it claims to be, the Word of God. All Scripture is God-breathed and is profitable for reproof and correction, for training in righteousness, for teaching. So he said, number 3, science cannot answer the origin of life. As a high school student and one going into college to pursue this way of life, he was convinced science had every answer to every question. In an astronomy class early in that experience, they were studying theories on the origin of life. And atheists and evolutionists have several, and they all have different names. And so John asked the professor, which one of these theories is most acceptable? Which one of these theories satisfactorily explains the creation of matter from nothing? Science has the answers. The professor, young man, you need to learn to ask intelligent questions. John said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And because science cannot answer questions like that, he said, this is not a question that a scientist tries to answer. It's not something that falls into the realm of science. Now you think about that. A scientist is not supposed to use common sense to ask the question because his field of study cannot answer it. He's required by his field of study to ignore it. Later, in a biology class, he asked the teacher, what was the process by which the original life, those original living cells that we have on earth, came into existence? You know, how did we go from the bang and the chaos to life? How did that structure or the generation of DNA occur? Again, different professor, same answer. That is not a question that falls within the realm of science. At some point, you have to take all the evidence in the scientific world and you have to look at it, and then you have to step out of science to faith to get the rest of the answer. Lord Kelvin, the British scientist, said, if you study science deep enough and long enough, it will force you to believe in God, because it cannot answer the most basic of questions. What's the why? The why is because science cannot answer any question that cannot be examined using the scientific theory. Well, there was no witness in the beginning. Can't examine it. You cannot put God in a test tube. You cannot examine it. And so if science can only go so far, and cannot tell me certain things, but God can, where does that leave me? You see, at some point, science runs out of answers. Let's get close to concluding. Common sense. Common sense dictates that a bang or an accident or random chance or chaotic event cannot produce life. Common sense says that intelligent design, the most complicated music in the world, the most complicated math problem in the world, requires an intelligence to create it. Intelligent design requires an intelligent creator. Number two, the Bible cannot be disproven. It always stands the test. Therefore, if science cannot answer the question of origins, but the Bible offers an answer and has proven itself irrefutable, we're back to the lack of common sense in our world. Faith makes sense. It is reasonable. Common sense, the ability to look at evidence and come to a rational conclusion. That coupled with just a cursory knowledge of science, just the most basic understanding of DNA or life cycles or anything like that, leads one back to God. Because things like that don't happen by accident. So what was the text? Back to Genesis chapter 8 for just a moment. God reasoning to himself, but saying it in written form for us. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest and cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Seasons, cycles, rotations, revolutions. The simplest language possible. It does not get any easier than God's explanation in Genesis 8. And yet Copernicus did not figure it out until 1543 AD. Design demands a designer. And here's the faith part. God has been telling us since the beginning that that is true, and he's been taking credit for it. And he has yet to be proven a liar. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And until this world ends, that cycle in Genesis 8 will continue. So world, please, if you've tuned in, come in out of the rain. Just think. It's not that difficult to open your eyes and see the evidence and use some common sense. What about us? We believe God exists. We believe He created. We believe He made us in His image. And we believe that we fail. Do we have enough common sense to understand that the one who created us is the only one that has the solution for that? Do we have enough common sense to realize that when God gives us the plan of salvation, that's the plan of salvation? That when God gives us the plan for the church, that's the plan for the church. When God gives us the plan for worship, that's the plan for worship. If we're going to hold the world accountable to having common sense, we have to have it ourselves. So what about you? Have you responded to that gospel plan? Have you responded to the Creator, the intelligent designer? If not, please do so this morning as we stand and sing.